Hi everyone, this is the third and last final lecture of week 11. Again, the materials discussed in this video, you won't be tested on it this week. This week we will not have a quiz, but it will appear in the quiz for next week. And again, please read the biblical text as I am going over the material very quickly, and things in the biblical text that I do not talk about will appear on your quiz. Okay. Last time we talked about the conclusion of Elijah's ministry, which ends with a bang as Elijah is taken up in a fiery divine chariot. Okay. Well, interestingly, the end of Elijah's reign or tenure, his ministry will coincide with the end of the dynasty of Ahab. Okay. And then 2 Kings 9 and 10, we are told about how the reign of Ahab, that is the reign of the husband of the evil queen Jezebel, and their sons, how this comes to an end. Okay, we are told Elisha, that is number 2, the guy who takes over from Elijah. We are told that he has secretly anointed Jehu, who is a general in Ahab's army, as the new king. Okay. And we are told that after he is anointed, Jehu quickly gets the backing of the military, and then goes to take the throne for himself by killing off the other members of the ruling family of Ahab. Okay. And Jehu begins in 2 Kings 9 by killing off the king of the north, that is the son of Ahab and Jezebel, who is ruling at that point. And after doing so, he heads now towards Jezebel to assassinate her as well. Okay, and her death is described in a pretty vivid detail in 2 Kings 9, verses 30 and 37, which I'm going to read now. Okay, when Jehu came to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it, and she painted her eyes and adorned her head and looked out of the window. And as Jehu entered the gate, she said, "Is it peace, Zimri, murderer of your master?" And he looked up to the window and said, "Who is on my side? Who?" And 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him, and he said, "Throw her down." So they threw her down, and some of her blood splattered on the wall and on the horses which trampled her. Then he went in and ate and drank, and he said, "See to that cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter." But when they went to bury her, they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. And when they came back and told him, he said, "This is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite. In the territory of Jezreel, the dog shall eat the flesh of Jezebel. The corpse of Jezebel shall be like dung on the field in the territory of Jezreel, so that no one can say, 'This is Jezebel.'" Okay. So we are told that when Jezebel hears about the arrival or advent of Jehu, we are told that she does her makeup, puts up her hair, adorns her hair, and looks out the window. And when she sees Jehu, she taunts him by calling him Zimri. And Zimri was a previous usurper in the north, and he usurped the throne, reigned only a week, and then was killed off. Okay. Now, some older male interpreters have interpreted Jezebel's actions as an attempt to seduce Jehu, the next king. Okay, and this interpretation is based on pretty unfounded or misinterpretations of Jezebel as a seductress. And this kind of reading of Jezebel really has it's very long lasting. Okay, indeed, the term Jezebel is still used in parts of the United States to describe a loose woman. Okay. However, really, this is, again, like I said, a misinterpretation. There's really no biblical evidence of this. And the closest you get seems to be a kind of mistranslation or a misunderstanding. Okay, that is, Jezebel is never said to have cheated on her husband. Rather, she seems pretty devoted to him, even getting him that garden that he wanted. Okay, indeed, considering how much the biblical writers hate her, if she were to have cheated on Ahab, I mean, they certainly would have told you about it, like, repeatedly. Okay. Rather, this understanding of Jezebel as a seductress stems from this kind of wrong reading of 2 Kings 9, verse 22, where Jehu calls her a sorceress and a whore. Okay. Now, and so it's really the whore part that becomes mistranslated or misunderstood. Whore or harlot is, in 2 Kings 22, it means something very particular, and you got to kind of look at the context. This is why context is so important, okay? It is not, when used here by Jehu, it's not meant in the normal sense of someone who sleeps around or sleeps with a lot of people or commits adultery, okay? Rather, Jezebel is called a harlot or a whore because she is someone who tempts Israel into worshiping another god, namely Baal instead of Yahweh. okay? And in the biblical text, what you'll see is that the worship of other gods, aside from Yahweh, is frequently described as committing kind of adultery or some kind of sexual offense against Yahweh, against God, okay? And that's the reason why Jezebel is called a whore, not because she cheats on her husband or because she's sexually promiscuous or whatever, but because her pious, she is pious to her own god Baal, okay? And in being such a pious follower of Baal, she tempts other Israelites to worship Baal as well. That's really why she's called this, okay? Indeed, while before like 1950s or 60s, when women really started becoming interpreters of the Bible, okay? Indeed, while older male interpreters, rather obsessed and kind of being sexist here, interpret Jezebel's last action of putting on makeup and doing her hair as an attempt to seduce Jehu, the next king of Israel. Feminist interpreters certainly recently read Jezebel's final actions rather differently, okay? They argue that it is wrong to think that anytime a woman puts on makeup or dresses nicely, it is to mainly attract men. Indeed, women, they argue, do stuff without really thinking about men at all, right? Attracting men may not be the be-all and end-all of every woman's life, okay? Something which these kind of older male interpreters seem to have difficulties remembering or maybe coming to terms with, okay? And this is how feminist interpreters understand Jezebel's last actions, okay? In contrast to the seductress idea. They argue that that Jezebel knows she is going to die, right? Indeed, this is not her first rodeo. She's been a princess and a queen for a long time, okay? And therefore, she must know that when another guy takes over and kills your son, you're dead. Okay, Indeed, one should imagine her at this point when she dies, not like Cersei or Marjorie Tyrell, if we're using the Game of Thrones references here, guys, but really as the Queen of Thorns, Olenna Tyrell. Okay, that's really more so how I think the text imagines her. Okay, that is what Jezebel is doing is trying to die with dignity. Okay, knowing that her end is near, she puts on her version of an armor. She gets dressed. She puts on makeup. Okay, does her hair, okay, makes one last sarcastic remark at the guy who killed her son and usurped the throne, okay. Indeed, some have argued that Jezebel's kind of last vision of her looking out of a window, this is a depiction of a goddess, okay, full of dignity and power, okay, which would of course kind of fit because of course Jezebel was so pious, maybe intertwined with the Baal cult. Some even do wonder whether she was a symbol of Baal's consort in her home country. Okay. Interestingly, bespeaking a double standard, it is notice how in the biblical text it is Jezebel's piety and her gender. That's what causes her to be so hated by the biblical authors, right? That is her outward and active religious devotion to her own god Baal. That's what bugs the biblical writers so very much, right? And again, it's odd to think that that would bother her. I mean, why should she, not being an Israelite, not worship her according to her own faith traditions, okay? But whatever, okay. This hatred is clearly evident in the biblical depiction of Jezebel's death, which is particularly nasty and particularly over the top. Okay, and we are told that Jezebel's eunuchs, they're really kind of the scumbags here, right? They throw her out the window. Okay, they're the ones that kind of flip sides. Okay, so notice the contrast between Elijah's ascent and Jezebel's descent. Okay, as the eunuchs throw her out the window. Okay, but of course, being just like thrown out the window, this is not enough for the biblical writers. Okay, we are told that her blood splatters on the wall and also on the horses, which then trample Jezebel's corpse. Okay, notice how ludicrous this all is, right? This is like a Bugs Bunny or like a Roadrunner cartoon. Okay, indeed, it's clear that the text tries to kill this hated figure Jezebel over and over again. It kind of really sounds like this, this evil witch, well, I stabbed her and then I like shot her and then I like ran her over with my bus and then I took my tractor and ran her over again. It's very outrageous, right? It doesn't even make any sense, okay? Indeed, the text is not done, right, telling you the various ways that they like killed Jezebel, okay? If, I guess, being thrown down and splattering and like being trampled by horses. As if that's not enough, we are told that in the midst of Jezebel dying in all these different ways, that Jehu, her murderer, goes off to have a bite to eat. Okay, and we are told that when he sends someone to finally bury her, we are told there's nothing there but her skull and her feet and the palms of her hands. Why? Because she has been eaten by dogs, right? She has, in essence, become dog shit. Okay? And this, of course, clearly shows that the biblical writers hate her. Okay. Like I said, there's reasons why she hate her. Okay. However, if you look at her story, even though it's from a very particular point of view, without bias, or try to, take a different look at her story, and the reality is that she is not that different from Elijah. Okay. Like Elijah, she too is extremely devoted to her God. She is also a religious fanatic. Like Elijah, she also murders prophets or the religious personnel on the other side. Okay, um, you know, uh, instead, what seems to really irk the writers, right, is that not only does Jezebel worship the wrong God, right, but she is the wrong gender and the wrong ethnicity, and on top of that is of the wrong religious tradition. Okay, that is, she doesn't act according to how people, that is the male writers of the text, want or think she should act. Right? She is a woman, a foreigner, who is not quiet, not passive, but dares to practice her faith, the faith of her own people. Okay, despite being in Israel. Okay, and that's really Jezebel's problem. She's kind of become a boogeyman. Okay, of all the fears, probably sexist fears of the male biblical writers. Okay, and indeed, notice that her story, especially portrayed in this very biased way by the authors, notice that it becomes a kind of object lessons. Okay, these stories about Jezebel, they're supposed to show what happens to women, especially foreign women with power, right? If they fail to be passive or silent. Right? If you act like Jezebel, you will be killed off like Jezebel. I mean, that seems to be not the subtle message here. Okay, it is, of course, not just Jezebel who gets a bad shake in the biblical text. And again, I would encourage you to read the biblical text. There's lots of stories about Jezebel, and I don't have time to go over it here. Indeed, we are told that Ahab, her husband, is also pictured badly, kind of as a weakling who is under the thumb of his more powerful and assertive wife. However, again, this is also a biased, not a neutral account of what happened. Indeed, as I stated, there's archaeological evidence and some evidence even in the biblical text that seem to hint that Ahab was a lot more successful. Okay, indeed, contrary to the biblical propaganda, Jezebel, interestingly, for her, for being so pious, really did not convert her husband. Okay, really seems to have respected her husband's faith tradition, and he, of course, being an Israelite, would have been a Yahweh follower. Okay, and indeed, there are hints in the text that Ahab, no matter what was going on in, with Jezebel and Elijah, remained a loyal Yahwist. Okay, so for example, we can see that Ahab and Jezebel's children, the names of their children end with a Yah, which is the kind of shortened form of Yahweh. Okay, we are also told that Ahab repents. We are told that Ahab himself never kills any of the prophets of Yahweh. Indeed, the servant of Ahab named Obadiah, he seems to be kind of affiliated with the Yahweh worshippers, and maybe even with Elijah and Elisha. So, again, there seems to be a different, if this reflects reality, something different might have happened. Okay. And despite all this, right, of course, Ahab and Jezebel are judged badly. Okay, we are told in 2 Kings 10, right, sort of a kind of final note that marks the end of the reign of Ahab and the kind of co-reign of Jezebel, right, that Jehu, remember the guy, the usurper, kills off all his rivals. That is, everybody in the family of Ahab is killed. Okay. Furthermore, to cleanse house or cleanse the land, we are told that Jehu tricks all the priests of Baal to gather and then slaughters them. and burns down the temple to Baal. Okay, this is of course not a religiously tolerant system or a religiously tolerant text. Okay. Um, Indeed, the hope is that, what I've been trying to mirror a little bit is that if you read the biblical text, if you start to read the biblical text with a little bit more suspicion, what you realize is that in the text, so as in life, right? Really, who the bad guys are and who the good guys are, this is not really very clear, okay? Especially because the name of God is used by both sides to claim credence for their positions and actions, okay? And that as a result of this, because of this unclarity, right, it's crucial that we not just kind of read blindly or assume blindly, but really just take the interpretation that's been given to you by others, okay? But that you learn to interpret for yourself, that you learn how to discern, tease out these suppressed voices, right? And refuse to kind of accept the propaganda that's loudly offered as the only truth. Okay, and of course the hope is that if you learn to do this with the biblical text, right, that you become better at doing this in real life.